Welcome to part 2. We're going to be putting our background together in this image and kind of explaining why we're doing everything and how we're going to be doing it. So let's just turn our plan off, and we're going to go ahead and turn our background layer back on. Now you'll notice we have two images that are relatively similar, and then we have one that's completely different. So what we're going to do, the first thing I'd like to do is go ahead and get these aligned in a way that's going to make them actually together. So I had the camera on a tripod, and I took a picture here and then aimed it down and took a picture there. That was just kind of like thinking ahead, like maybe I'll need some of this ground. Maybe you don't, but it never hurts to take a couple more photos than you think you might need. So what I'd like to do, this is actually the photo that I want to stay in place, okay? I want this one to stay in place, and then I want this one to kind of like just fit to this one. And when you want to do that, make sure you bring your bring one image down. The one you want to stay in place, put that one on the bottom, and then we'll lock the position on that one. Okay? And hopefully this is going to work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but for the most part, that will make sure that this one will stay in place. Alright. So I'm going to hold down Shift, click on the two of those, and then we'll go to Edit, and then I'm going to go to Auto Align Layers. Hit Auto, and we're going to hit OK. Now most of the time, if you do this, it will keep this one from getting distorted. Yeah, there we can see this image now is not distorted. This is the main image here, right? This is the one that we really want to keep intact here. This one is just for the ground. So you can see it had to distort this one a little bit to make it actually fit into the image, which I'm fine with because that one I'm really just getting for the ground and things like that. So if you want one that don't want to get distorted, lock the position and put it on the bottom, and then shift click and do it. Okay? And that generally works pretty well for me. I can't say every time because sometimes Photoshop just does whatever it wants. Okay, now what we want to do, because we have both of those, pretty cool. It's like a, little bit of a way to make a panorama. If you guys are going out and photographing backgrounds, by the way, I really would suggest it. Pan down, pan up, pan left and right, because you never know where you're going to need things like that. Okay, now what I want to do is just blend these a little bit better. You can see there's a line here, and we're going to put a layer mask on this layer. So let's just click on our layer mask. I'm going to zoom in here, and now we're just going to use a regular brush. We're including some brushes with this tutorial. This is not important what brush I use now. I'm just going to paint black on my layer mask around this border here until I don't see any sign of, there we go, let's make a hard edge brush, until I don't see any sign of the other image. Now, a nice area to choose a transition point. A transition point is where it goes from this image to the other image, is like right down here where it's like a dark mucky line, right? Like that's a nice, if it doesn't line up perfectly there, is that a big deal at all? No, because it's a dark mucky line. You're not going to be able to see that. So, and in case you guys are wondering, that actually is the proper Photoshop term for it, dark and mucky. That's an official term. Alright, let's turn this back off and on, and we're just going to paint black in there until we get something that looks pretty good. You just want to find like a line, like to mask kind of along that line or something like that. You don't want to be able to see the seams visibly, even if you do, it might have like a little bit of a seam. There we go. If you just want to see what your layer mask looks like, I recommend holding down or just pressing the slash key, which is above the return key on your keyboard, and that's going to turn like quick mask view on. So here you can see, look, I missed that. It's kind of hard to see like if you miss an area or not. So if you do, I just want to make double sure, I'll usually do something like that. And there we go, we can see. Hit that slash key and you're good to go. So here we go. There's our background extended, which is great. And now we've got this guy. Now, the bikers that we're going to put in, we're actually going to put them in on the other side. I want to flip this background over, and I didn't know that. It's kind of hard because I have to teach you guys how to put this background together now, but when I was actually making the image, I hadn't decided whether the background would face this way or the other way. So the order at which I'm doing things is the order at which it's best to teach you, but in the middle of editing a photo, you can totally flip your background all around. You do not have to make it either one way or another. There's no right way to do things. Okay. All right. So the next thing we're going to do, and I'm going to just touch on this very briefly here. But the next thing we're going to do is figure out how to get this this background into this guy. So the first thing to do that, I'm going to shift click these two layers, and you can either group those layers together, or you can go ahead and merge those layers. Now, I'm okay merging the layers. I know they're good. There's not much I really want to do other, to these layers. Like they're pretty much good. So if you want to merge these two layers, just hit Command E, and that will merge them, and then you go from 2 layers to 1. So that's just a a great file saving thing. If you were scared to do that, just group them together instead. Okay, now I'm going to flip this horizontal. So I'm going to hit Command T, right click, and go to Flip Horizontal. Right here. And there we go. We're flipping that, and we're going to hit Enter, and that's our alley going to be off to the right there. Okay, now I want to bring this guy in as well, and this is just from a completely different place. And what I want to do is make sure that it actually fits with the image that we've got going on there. So we're going to lower the opacity on this layer just a bit, the top layer here. And I want to make sure that the vanishing point is about the same. Now we're going to talk about this quite a bit in just a little bit. But basically I want to figure out my horizon line. So we're going to talk about matching perspective quite a bit in a couple sections, and you're really going to love it. But basically wherever your vanishing lines go to. So this perspective distortion is like, we know the line to the top of the building and the bottom of the building are actually parallel, right? They're the same distance from the Earth, but they don't look like they are. It looks smaller down here than it does up here, and that's perspective distortion. If you keep following this line to infinity, and you keep following this line to infinity, where they're going to meet is your horizon. They will always meet at your horizon. That's how perspective works. So your horizon is basically the vanishing point, where this point and this point meet each other, and that's going to be right about there. I can just see it because we have another line that's coming in right about there. So I'm going to hit Command R, which will bring up my rulers, and then I'm going to go right up here and drag down, and I'm going to put that right about there. Now it's not incredibly important to be accurate at this point. It will be in a little bit, but at this point I just need a rough idea of where the horizon is. Okay, let's make this layer visible now. We'll bring up our opacity, and I want to make sure that this layer is about in the same place. And right about there it looks pretty good. I just want to make sure, you can't do this, by the way, and you can't do this. You want your horizon for this image and this other image, for the two you're going to put together, you need them to be in about the same place. It doesn't have to, 1 pixel up or down is not going to make or break the image, but you cannot do this. You cannot composite this in and make it look real if the image on the underside has its horizon there. Okay, so that's a really quick way to just line things up. Just follow the horizon, you'll be good to go. Okay, so now what I want to do is basically figure out where this is going to come in, and where this file is going to come in and where it's going to fade out. So let's go ahead, and I've got about our right position. We've got a horizon, that's here, and just mute. We've got a horizon that's here, and on this image, a pretty similar horizon. Okay, so we're going to just get that out of the way for now. We're going to get much more detailed into that later, but for now, you just got to make sure that the horizons are about the same. Let's put a layer mask on this layer, and then I'm going to just paint black on this layer mask, and what we're aiming for here is a nice transition area from one layer to another one. Now we're going to run into some problems here in just a second. You're going to see, and you're going to be like, what are you going to do about these problems? I'm freaking out, Aaron. And oftentimes these things are easier to take care of than you would think. All right, so basically on the ground, that's not a hard thing to do, right? The ground looks like ground over here, and it looks like ground over there, and cool. The ground's pretty much blending in with itself. I could spend a little bit more time on it if I wanted to, but you don't have to. It doesn't really matter. Ground is ground, right? So that's looking pretty good. Now, here where it comes to the building, we've got this building, and then we've got that over there, and obviously they're not exactly blending in, right? It's not like, oh, okay, cool, this makes sense. That most of the time trees just kind of fade into another building. That doesn't make sense. So we have a couple of options here of what to do. Our first option that I already know, let's just create a new layer, is the fact that I'm already planning on putting a biker right here, right? We had our plan. They're going to be sitting right there, and hopefully their body is going to be right about there. So that's going to cover up a lot of this area anyway. But the other thing that I want to do is just make sure that this actually does fit with what's going on behind it. So I'll show you guys how to do that. Okay, Well, first issue we have is a light and dark issue, right? Like this is the background here. This guy here is quite a bit darker, especially at this point, than this area over here. So it's quite a bit darker, right? We can either choose to darken the foreground or lighten the background. Either way we want to do. And we can do a little bit of both. So let's try a little bit of both. So here on my background layer, I'm going to create an adjustment layer, and we're going to go to curves. We're going to use curves a lot in this tutorial. Brighten things, darken things, everything you want to do. Okay. Now I'm going to clip this curves adjustment layer to this layer, which is going to make this the curves only visible where this layer is visible. Okay. To do that, right click and go to here we go. Right click and go to create clipping mask, or you can hit Option Command G, which I'll be doing for the rest of the tutorial. Okay. Now if I click here and I bring this a little bit brighter, you can see it's going to only affect that one layer. Alright, and that's looking pretty good there. Let's go ahead and close that out. Now I don't necessarily need this or want this to be visible everywhere, but right here it looks pretty good. So here on my layer mask, I'm going to hit Command I to invert my layer mask. Okay, and then we're just going to paint white right over here, and there we go, on my layer mask. So that's just brightening up that area. So we can see it's still not, it's not good, like it's not, you know, this is not, doesn't look 100% real, but it looks a lot better than it did. And if you weren't studying this really closely, you'd probably be like, it's fine, whatever. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we need to figure out a decent transition line, right? We need to figure out a place for this wall, this building, to transition it into the other one. Well, there's really no rules whenever you do this. I mean, there's nothing to say that this building doesn't come up here and this wall is like that deep and then it comes down and then it joins to that building, right? Like, why can't it do that? I think it can. Just because it didn't, you know, just because in the original it did that doesn't mean that we can't cut it off that deep now, right? So that's the kind of like cool trickery you can play. As long as you like stay with perspective, you can do a lot of really cool stuff. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so basically all I need to do is I'm going to create a marquee tool here. There we go. Rectangular marquee, and we've got a nice, you know, a nice straight line up and down right there. And we're just going to bring that over to the right. So it's going to go up, come down, over, and down again. Okay? Looking pretty good. Now let's just refine that edge a little bit. Maybe I'll just get a little bit of feathering. Looks pretty good. So it's, you know, you can see it's not incredibly sharp here. There we go. Now here on this layer, what we're going to do is I'm going to paint with my paintbrush with black on that layer, and that's going to make it look like, you know, this. So this layer is no longer visible right here, right? I'm going to hit Command H to hide that selection. Okay, so now what we have is a building that just stops here and comes right down there, and then it just connects on with this other building that like it does not connect with. You know that it doesn't connect with that building, but it's fine. It's not a big deal. There's going to be a biker right there, but up here it looks just fine, and that's the cool part of Photoshop. Let's see if we can blend this in a little bit more. So I'm just going to click on there and paint black on this layer mask. Alright. There we go. We'll just blend it a little bit more. I don't really want those windows to be there though. Okay, that looks pretty cool. So now we've basically figured out how to make, you know, how to make this area, the one backdrop, look like it just goes into the other one, especially when we put someone in front of there. Not too bad, right? Not too hard. Okay, the other thing that I'd like to do is maybe we want this background to be a little bit darker on the left side here than on the right side. So if we want to do that, we can't affect this layer, right? Because this layer doesn't contain that information. I can either do it on top of everything, or I'll just do it right on top of this layer, which actually does contain that information. Alright, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go to my marquee tool again. We're going to select that out based on, there we go, based on where that wall is. Okay, we're going to go to refine edge and hit OK. There we go. It doesn't have to be perfect, don't worry about it just yet. Now I'm going to go to curves, make this a bit darker. Alright, you can use curves. Actually, there's one cool thing that I do want to show you guys. and that's using the exposure. I just started playing around with this. It works pretty well. The reason why exposures can sometimes work a little bit different and better than curves is that it actually will take into account saturation. So if you just make something too dark or darker in curves, a lot of the time it's going to keep its saturation, which is not technically accurate, because as things get darker and more in shadow, they lose saturation. So sometimes I'm going to be using exposure. I've just started playing around with this, so I'm not the master of that just yet, but it is a pretty cool thing. Alright, we're seeing a little bit of like a gap here, so I'm going to click on this layer mask here, hit Command T, and I'm going to bring my little control point right up to the top, and then I can move this around and I can see, you know, where it's affecting. I'm going to hit Command H because I don't want to see this borderline there, but now I'm going to just bring that right around, something like that, and then hit Enter. So I was able to just see, here's it before, see building is not straight up and down basically, and there's the after. I just shifted it a little bit over to the left. Now I'm going to use my move tool and just hit the left tool inside. If that doesn't do it, you can blur this layer mask a little bit. So we're going to go to Filter. Make sure you're deselected, by the way. Hit Command D. Filter, Blur, and then over here to Gaussian Blur. And we'll just use a pretty low radius. There we go, something like that, and that should get us right there, right? So now it looks like, you know, this side of the building is just a little bit darker than that one, or at least it's not like shining out. We can change our mind, by the way, at any point in time. It doesn't really matter right now what we're doing, because we're using layers. So if it doesn't look good later, you just turn this off. Okay. Now here on this layer, I'm going to just paint black right here in these bushes. Just kind of like fade that in. We don't need a sharp line there, right? That would be silly. And there we go as well. Okay, cool. So that we just darkened that up a little bit. Now here on our foreground area, we're going to have to wind up cropping this image, obviously, because we've got some area down there. But before we do that, let's just create a new layer, and we're going to clone stamp out just to give us a little more options. So I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp tool. We're on a new layer, so make sure you hit current and below as your sample here, and I'm going to sample right there, and then just paint in. Alright, there we go, and just painting that in, going from left to the right, kind of sampling in a few different places here. Doesn't really matter. I mean, this is just ground, right? So it's kind of hard to make ground wrong. Okay. Very cool. So that just gives us, now I don't have to crop in to here, right? Like before I would have to crop in from the left, but now I have the option to extend it all the way out to there. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and crop this in. I'm not 100% sure that this is the crop that I want yet, but I'll show you guys how to do it. We're going to hit C for the crop tool. Make sure you do not have this button up here checked that says delete crop pixels. You do not want to delete your crop pixels almost ever in Photoshop. I don't ever do it. So it just gives you a lot more options if you are wrong about something, which we're humans. We're always wrong for the love of Pete, we're always wrong. That was really random that I said that. Let's go ahead and crop. I'm going to bring our crop tool here, and from the bottom right, we're just going to click in, and we're going to go up to the top. There we go, till we can see all that stuff, and then from the right in from the left. There we go, and we're going to hit this checkbox. So we're not stuck to this. We can change our mind at any point in time because we have not clicked that. I can just get more crop back if we need to get more of the crop back. Okay, so this is creating our backdrop. Now, I have not guaranteed that it's going to look great with our bikers just yet. That's not even crossed my mind, but it is a backdrop that's together from 3 different photos, which is pretty cool. Alright, and that is the end of this section. The next section, we're going to be cutting out our bikers to get ready for it.